The undercover owner walked into his coffee shop, but froze when he heard the customer's words. Christopher Harrison adjusted his cap for the third time that morning, feeling the rough fabric of the worn apron against his chest. His fingers trembled slightly as he held the coffee cup, and it wasn't from the hot steam rising in spirals. The coffee shop was too empty for a Saturday morning, too quiet. He had built an empire of 17 coffee shops spread across 3 states, but that one, the Dawn Cafe, was special. It was the first, the one that should have run like clockwork, but in the last 4 months, sales had dropped 40%. That's when she walked in, an Asian woman with straight black hair, looking around 40, wearing a simple dark blouse. She didn't look around like customers usually do. She didn't look for a table. She went straight to the counter with hurried steps, grabbed the cup Christopher was preparing, and then he heard it. Her voice was low, almost a whisper into the phone pressed against her ear, but the words cut through Christopher like a sharp blade. "I got the money from selling my mother's jewelry. Now I can finally save this coffee shop." The cup shook in Christopher's hand. Hot coffee splattered onto the light wood counter. He froze completely, unable to move, unable to breathe. Save the coffee shop? Which coffee shop? His? But he wasn't selling anything. There was no deal in progress. And that woman was a complete stranger. He had never seen her before. Across the room, Natalie Foster, the manager of the Dawn Cafe for 3 years, stopped mid-stride with a tray in her hands. Her eyes narrowed as she saw the new employee standing like a statue behind the counter. She set the tray on an empty table harder than she intended and walked over to them. The customer noticed Christopher's shocked expression. Her fingers tightened on the phone, and she hung up quickly, but it was too late. Her eyes met his for a moment that seemed to last forever. There was something in that look, determination, fear, and a deep sadness Christopher couldn't decipher. "Everything okay here?" Natalie's voice cut through the silence like a knife. She smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "First day is always tough, right? Let me help." Christopher forced his muscles to move. He set the cup on the counter and took a step back. His heart pounded against his ribs. He needed to understand what was happening. He needed to find out what that woman was talking about. But he couldn't reveal his identity. Not yet. "Sorry," he mumbled, trying to keep his voice steady. "It's just that I thought I recognized you from somewhere." The customer picked up the cup with both hands, as if she needed the warmth to steady herself. She looked at Christopher again, this time more carefully. She studied his face, the cap pulled down low, the apron hiding his expensive clothes underneath. "I don't think we've met before," she said softly. There was something gentle in her voice, but also a firmness that suggested she wasn't someone easily fooled. "But thanks for the coffee." She turned to leave, but Christopher couldn't help himself. "Wait," the words came out before he could think better of it. "What did you mean?" "About saving the coffee shop." The silence that followed was heavy. Natalie stopped arranging the cups behind the counter. The customer turned slowly, her dark eyes studying Christopher with renewed intensity. "Why do you want to know?" she asked, her voice low but not threatening. "Just curious, cautious." Christopher felt cold sweat trickle down his back. He couldn't tell the truth, not yet. Not before finding out what the hell was going on with his business. "It's just that I work here now," he improvised quickly. "And it seems like things aren't going very well. I just wanted to understand better." The woman looked at Natalie, then back at Christopher. For a moment it seemed like she was about to say something important. Her lips parted, the words almost coming out. But then she shook her head slightly. "It's nothing," she said, but the lie was obvious. "I just got confused." She left quickly, her coffee still steaming in her hand. Christopher watched her through the display window, seeing her stop on the sidewalk, pull out her phone again and make another call. Her hands gestured as she spoke, clearly agitated. "Christopher!" Natalie called, making him turn abruptly. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't decipher. There was tension in her shoulders, in the way she held the pen in her hand. "That name you put on the hiring form, is it your real name?" Christopher's heart skipped a beat. He had been careful. He had used fake documents, created a complete identity. Christopher Miller, a name common enough not to raise suspicion, but had he made a mistake? "Of course it is," he replied, trying to sound natural. "Why wouldn't it be?" Natalie shrugged, but her fingers drummed nervously on the counter. "No reason. It's just that you look like someone I know. Or knew. I don't know." She walked away before Christopher could respond, disappearing through the door that led to the small office in the back. Christopher stood in the middle of the empty cafe, his hands still trembling slightly. What had he just witnessed, and why did Natalie seem so nervous? He looked around the space he knew so well. The walls painted a soft beige, the wooden shelves he had chosen himself 5 years ago. The round tables with iron chairs that gave the place a vintage feel. Everything seemed the same, but something was deeply wrong. He could feel it. The door chimed again, and Christopher turned, expecting to see the Asian customer returning. But it was someone else. An older woman, grey hair tied in a low bun, wearing a simple cleaning uniform. She came in carrying a large bag and headed straight to the back without looking at him. "Good morning, Mrs. Teresa," Natalie called from the office, her voice sounding forcedly cheerful. "Good morning." The reply came low, almost inaudible. Christopher watched. Mrs. Teresa. He vaguely remembered her from the reports he received monthly. She had worked at the Dawn Cafe for years, even before Christopher bought the place. She was part of the furniture, they said, but he had never really paid attention to her, never stopped to get to know her for real. The next few hours passed in a confused haze. Christopher served coffee, wiped tables, tried to look like a regular employee while his mind kept returning to those words. Save this cafe. What did it mean? Save it from what? From whom? He observed everything with new eyes. The way Natalie served the few customers who came in, always efficient but distant. How she checked her phone constantly, her fingers flying over the screen in quick messages. How Mrs. Teresa worked in silence, cleaning every corner with an almost reverent care. But her eyes were always sad, always worried. At 11 in the morning, when business should have been at its peak, the cafe was still practically empty. Only 4 tables occupied in a space that could comfortably seat 30 people. Christopher did the math in his head. With this kind of traffic, they could barely pay the employees, let alone the rent, the suppliers, the taxes. He was behind the counter preparing a cappuccino when he saw the Asian customer pass by the display window again. This time, she didn't come in. She just stopped outside, looking in with an anguished expression. Her eyes scanned the empty interior of the cafe, and Christopher could see the worry etched on her face. Natalie saw her too, and her reaction was immediate. His body tensed, his jaw locked. She grabbed her phone and quickly went out back, speaking quietly but urgently. Christopher Harrison couldn't hear what she was saying, but his businessman's intuition was screaming that something very wrong was happening there. He finished his cappuccino and took it to table 3, where a middle-aged man was reading a newspaper. When he returned to the counter, Mrs. Teresa was there, wiping down the counter with a rag. "You're new here," she said without looking at him. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am. I started today." She made a low sound in her throat. "I hope you don't stay long." Christopher stopped, surprised by her bluntness. "Why not?" Mrs. Teresa finally looked at him. Her eyes were light brown, tired, but there was a sharp intelligence in them that Christopher hadn't expected. "Because this place is dying," she said simply, "and nobody seems to care enough to save it." Before Christopher could respond, Natalie came back from the office. "Mrs." Teresa immediately lowered her head and went back to her work, as if the conversation had never happened, but the words echoed in Christopher's mind. Nobody seems to care enough to save it. The afternoon dragged on slowly. Christopher watched, learned, absorbed every detail. He noticed how the coffee Natalie prepared had a slightly bitter taste, different from the recipe he himself had developed. He noticed how she sometimes forgot to heat the milk properly, or used beans that were clearly not the quality he had always demanded. At 3 in the afternoon, a man walked in. Expensive suit, perfectly aligned tie, leather briefcase in hand. He didn't order anything. He went straight to Natalie, who led him to the office. They were in there for almost half an hour, and when they came out, the man had a satisfied smile on his face. "Until next week, then," he said loud enough for Christopher to hear. "Until next week," Natalie confirmed, but her voice was tense. The man left, and Natalie stood in the middle of the cafe looking around with an expression Christopher couldn't decipher. Was there guilt there? Fear? Determination? Christopher waited until she went back to the office before approaching Mrs. Teresa, who was now wiping down the empty tables. "Who was that man?" he asked quietly. Mrs. Teresa looked at the office door, making sure they were alone. "Trouble," she replied simply. "That man is trouble." "What kind of trouble?" She studied him for a long moment, as if deciding whether she could trust him. "The kind that makes coffee shops close," she finally said. "The kind that makes good people lose everything." Christopher felt his blood run cold. Before he could ask more questions, the door jingled again, and this time it was her, the Asian customer. She walked in with determined steps, went straight to the counter where Christopher was. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice low but firm. "Outside, now." Christopher looked at the office where Natalie still was, looked at Mrs. Teresa, who was wiping a table harder than necessary, and then looked back at that woman, who somehow knew something was terribly wrong with his cafe. "All right," he said. "Let's go." They left together, the bell on the door chiming behind them. Christopher quickly took off his apron, put his hands in his pants pockets, and followed the woman down the sidewalk. She walked half a block before stopping in front of a small square. "My name is Mei Lin," she said, turning to face him, "and I know who you are, Christopher Harrison. The real Christopher Harrison." Christopher's world stopped spinning. "How do you—" "Because I've been watching this cafe for weeks," May interrupted, "because I knew something was wrong, and because I would recognize John Harrison's son anywhere. You have the same eyes as your father, the same mannerisms, the same way of holding a coffee cup as if it were the most precious thing in the world." Christopher felt his legs go weak. John Harrison, his father, the man who had built the Dawn Cafe from nothing, who had turned a small space into a community gathering spot. The man who had lost his life 5 years ago in a car accident, leaving the coffee shop to his wife, Eleanor Harrison, his mother. "You knew my father," Christopher said. It wasn't a question. "Your father saved my life," May replied, and there were tears in her eyes now. 20 years ago, I was a newly graduated nurse, no money, no connections. Your father gave me my first job, paid my rent when I was about to be evicted, treated me like family when I had no one in this country." Christopher felt his throat tighten. He didn't know that. He didn't know anything about the people his father had helped, the lives he had touched. Because Christopher had spent the last 15 years running from the memories, running from the pain, running from the responsibility. "And now," May continued, her voice trembling, "I'm watching his legacy be destroyed. I'm watching the coffee shop he loved being sabotaged from the inside out. And I can't let that happen." "Sabotaged?" Christopher felt anger rise in his chest. "By whom?" "By Natalie Foster," May said. "Your manager. She's receiving money from a company that wants to buy this place. They want to tear down the Dawn Cafe and build an international franchise, and she's doing everything to make it happen." Christopher clenched his fists. The pieces were starting to fit. The bad coffee, the cold service, the lack of customers. It all made sense now. "Why didn't you go to the owner?" he asked. "Why didn't you tell this to—" He stopped. Because he knew the answer. Knew it even before May spoke. "Your mother," May said softly, "doesn't know anything. Because she can't know. Because she's been in a private clinic for 3 months, Christopher, and she barely remembers her own name. The world collapsed on Christopher like an avalanche. His mother, Eleanor Harrison, the strong, determined woman who raised him alone after John left. The woman he abandoned 15 years ago after a terrible fight, bitter words that should never have been said, slamming doors that were never reopened. "I didn't know," he whispered, feeling tears burn his eyes. "I didn't—" "No one knew," May said. She hid it well. Hid it until she couldn't anymore. until she started forgetting to pay the bills, forgetting to eat, forgetting her own address. I was the one who found her wandering the street 3 months ago. I was the one who called the ambulance. I was the one who checked her into the clinic. Why? Christopher asked, his voice breaking. Why did you do all this? Because your father would have done the same for me, May answered simply. Because I owe him everything, and because I promised myself I would protect his family, even if it cost me everything I have. Christopher looked at that small, determined woman in front of him. She had sold her own mother's jewelry. She had sacrificed what was likely her only financial security, all to save the coffee shop of a man she barely knew, but who had been kind to her 2 decades ago. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to hit like and especially subscribe to the channel. That helps us a lot who are just starting out. Now continuing. What exactly is Natalie doing? Christopher asked, trying to focus on the anger instead of the pain. It was easier to deal with the anger. She's embezzling money, May explained, buying cheap ingredients and pocketing the difference, paying suppliers with bad checks, driving away customers with poor service, all to make the coffee shop look like a bad business, a failing place that needs to be sold urgently. And the man in the suit? What did I see today? Marcus Sterling. He represents the chain that wants to buy the place. They've already bought 3 coffee shops in this area, always the same way. They sabotage from the inside, offer a ridiculously low price when the owner is desperate, and then build their franchises on the ashes of what existed before. Christopher felt nausea rise in his throat. He was a businessman. He had built his own empire by buying small coffee shops and turning them into profitable businesses. But he had never ever done anything like that. He had never deliberately destroyed someone else's dream. How did you find out all of this? He asked. I volunteer at the clinic where your mother is hospitalized, Mei Lin explained. 3 times a week I go there to read to the patients, talk to them, keep them company. Your mother, she has moments when everything becomes clear again. And in one of those moments she told me about the coffee shop, about how the bills were overdue, about how Natalie said there was no money to pay for the clinic, about how she was going to have to sell everything. But there is money, Christopher said, doing the math in his head. The Dawn Cafe has always been profitable. Even with the slow business, there should have been enough money to... There should, Mei Lin confirmed. But Natalie is siphoning it all. The profits go to ghost accounts. The actual expenses are minimal. She's bleeding the coffee shop dry until there's nothing left. Christopher took a deep breath, trying to control the storm of emotions inside him. And do you have proof of this? Mei Lin smiled for the first time, and it was a sad but determined smile. I do. Recordings, conversations between Natalie and Marcus, emails, bank transfers. I've been collecting everything for weeks. But I can't just take this to your mother because she wouldn't understand. Not now. And I can't go to the authorities because that would take months, maybe years. And your mother doesn't have that kind of time. The clinic, Christopher whispered. The bills are overdue. 3 months overdue, Mei Lin confirmed. They're going to transfer her to a public facility in 2 weeks if no one pays. And the treatment there, it's not the same. She won't get better. She'll only get worse. Christopher felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. His mother, alone, sick, needing help. And he didn't even know, hadn't even bothered to find out. He had been so busy building his empire, so focused on proving he was better than his father, that he had forgotten the one person who had always been by his side. Why did you tell me all of this? He asked. Why didn't you just use the money you got to pay for the clinic and expose Natalie? Because it's not enough, Mei Lin answered. The money I got only covers 2 months. After that, we'll be in the same situation. And because I know this coffee shop isn't just your mother's, it's yours too. It's your legacy. And I think it's time for you to come home and fight for it. The words hit Christopher like a bolt of lightning. Come home. As if it were that simple. As if 15 years of silence could be erased with an apology. As if his mother, who could barely remember her own name, could forgive him for abandoning her. She won't even recognize me, he said, his voice breaking. Maybe not, Mei Lin admitted. But you will recognize her, and that has to be enough. Because she needs you, Christopher. Mrs. Teresa needs you. This coffee shop needs you. And I can't do this alone. Christopher looked back at the Dawn Cafe. Through the window, he could see Natalie serving a customer, her fake smile perfectly in place. He could see Mrs. Teresa wiping down an empty table, her shoulders hunched under the weight of secrets she couldn't share. He could see the space his father had created with so much love being slowly destroyed. And something inside him broke and was reassembled into a new shape, a shape that no longer ran, a shape that fought. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. May sighed, relieved. "Keep working there. Observe. Learn. Collect evidence. I'll keep monitoring the conversations between Natalie and Marcus. When we have enough, we'll confront them, together. And my mother. I'll pay for 2 more months at the clinic with the money I got," May said. "That gives us time. Time for you to get to know her again. Time for you to prepare. And time to save this cafe before it's too late." Christopher nodded slowly. It was a risky plan. A plan that depended on many things going right. But it was the only plan they had. "There's one more thing," May said, hesitating. "Mrs. Teresa, she knows everything. And she has documents, original receipts, records that Natalie doesn't know exist. She's keeping it all at home, protecting your father's legacy the only way she knows how. Why hasn't she gone to the authorities? Because she's afraid of losing her job. She's 68 years old, Christopher. No one else will hire her, and she needs that job to survive. But if you guarantee she'll be protected, she'll help you. I know she will." Christopher ran his hand over his face, feeling the weight of it all fall on his shoulders. In a single day, he had discovered that his mother was sick, that his business was being sabotaged, and that a woman he barely knew was sacrificing everything to save his father's legacy. How had he gotten to this point? How had he drifted so far from the person he used to be? "All right," he finally said. "Let's do this. Let's save the Dawn Cafe, and let's bring my mother home." May smiled, and this time it was a genuine smile. "Your father would be proud of you." The words should have comforted him, but they only made the pain worse, because Christopher wasn't sure if it was true. He wasn't sure if he deserved anyone's pride. Not after everything he had done, not after all the time he had wasted. But he was going to try. He was going to do everything in his power to fix the mistakes of the past, even if it meant confronting demons he had buried long ago, even if it meant admitting he had been wrong, even if it meant losing everything. Because in the end, it wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the empire he had built or the success he had achieved. It was about family. It was about legacy. It was about doing the right thing, even when it hurt. May handed him a piece of paper with a phone number. "Call me if you find out anything, or if you need help. We're in this together now." Christopher put the paper in his pocket and watched May walk away down the sidewalk. She was small, delicate, but there was a strength in her that he couldn't help but admire. A strength that came from a place of love and gratitude, not ambition or greed. He went back into the cafe, put his apron back on, adjusted his cap. Natalie looked at him suspiciously when he walked in. "Where were you?" "Smoking," Christopher lied easily. "Sorry, it won't happen again." "It better not," she said coldly. "We have enough problems without employees disappearing in the middle of a shift." Christopher bit his tongue, resisting the urge to say that he knew exactly what the real problems were. Instead, he went behind the counter and started cleaning the coffee machines, work he hadn't done in years, but that his body still remembered how to do. Mrs. Teresa walked past him carrying a broom. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Christopher saw something there. Recognition, hope, as if she knew something had changed. "I need to talk to you," he whispered when Natalie stepped out to take a call. "When she's not around." Mrs. Teresa nodded almost imperceptibly. "Tomorrow. Come at 6 in the morning, before the others arrive." And then she walked away, continuing her work as if nothing had happened. But Christopher knew he had gained an ally who had been protecting her father's legacy all this time, waiting for someone to come and fight for it. The rest of the day passed in a fog. Christopher served coffee, wiped tables, watched every move Natalie made with new eyes. He saw how she tampered with the sales records, jotting down numbers lower than the actual ones. He saw how she treated customers coldly, almost with hostility, making them feel uncomfortable enough not to come back. It was meticulous, it was cruel, and it was efficient. But now Christopher knew, and knowledge was power. He just needed to be patient, wait for the right moment, and then act. When the clock struck 6 in the evening and Natalie announced they were closing, Christopher took off his apron with relief. His feet ached from standing all day. His hands smelled of coffee and dish soap. But his mind was clear for the first time in years. He knew what he needed to do. First, he would go home and review all the documents he had from the Dawn Cafe: contracts, financial records, sales reports. He would look for discrepancies, for signs of what Natalie was doing. Second, he would visit his mother. For the first time in 15 years, he would look her in the eyes and ask for forgiveness. Even if she didn't recognize him, even if it was too late, he needed to do this. And third, he would expose Natalie and Marcus. He would destroy their plan and save the cafe. Not just for his mother, but for May, for Mrs. Teresa, for all the customers who had lost their favorite spot, for his father, whose legacy deserved to be preserved. Christopher left the Dawn Cafe as the sun began to set, painting the sky orange and pink. The streets were full of people returning home from work, children playing in the nearby square, street vendors offering their goods. Normal life, ordinary life. The kind of life Christopher had forgotten existed while building his empire from the top of office towers and conference rooms overlooking the city. But here, in this humble neighborhood where it all began, life went on. And maybe, just maybe, he could be part of it again. His phone rang in his pocket. An unknown number. He answered cautiously. "Christopher?" It was May's voice. "I need to tell you something. Something I found out today." "What is it?" "Natalie isn't working alone. There's someone else involved, someone close to your family." Christopher's blood ran cold. "Who?" "I don't know the name yet, but I overheard a conversation between her and Marcus. They mentioned someone who has access to your mother's documents, someone who signed some papers in her name without authorization." "Christopher, I think they're trying to take ownership of the cafe legally." Christopher felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. This was worse than he thought. Much worse. It wasn't just sabotage. It was fraud. It was theft. "I'll find out who it is," he promised, his voice hard. "And I'll make that person pay." "Be careful," May warned. "These people are dangerous. Not physically, but they have resources. They have lawyers. They have money. They'll fight." "So will I," Christopher said. "And I have something they don't. I have the truth, and I have you." He hung up and kept walking, but his mind was racing. Who had access to his mother's documents? Who would she trust enough to give power of attorney? And then something occurred to him, a horrible thought. A thought he didn't want to consider, but that made terrible sense. There was only one person his mother would trust blindly. One person who had been in the family for decades. One person who knew every detail of the business, his father's younger brother, his Uncle Richard. Christopher stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, people passing around him as he processed this possibility. Richard Harrison had always been the troubled brother, the one who could never keep a job, who always borrowed money and never paid it back, the one who had distanced himself from the family after John's death, swearing he deserved half the inheritance. But John had left everything to Eleanor, the cafe, the house, the savings, and Richard never forgave that. Could it be that he was working with Natalie, that he was helping to destroy his own brother's business out of revenge and greed? Christopher picked up his phone again and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. 3 rings, 4, and then a sleepy voice answered. "Hello?" "Michael?" Christopher said, recognizing the voice of his personal attorney. "It's me, Christopher. I need you to do something for me, urgent." "Christopher? Dude, do you know what time it is?" "I know, and I'm sorry, but this can't wait. I need you to investigate my Uncle Richard, everything about him, where he lives, what he does, his finances, everything." "Your uncle? Why?" "Because I think he's stealing from my mother, and I'm going to prove it." There was silence on the line, and then Michael said, "I'll start tomorrow morning. But Christopher, if this is what I think it is, you need to prepare yourself. Family cases can get ugly, real ugly." "I know," Christopher said, "but I have no choice. My mother needs me, and I'm not going to abandon her again." He hung up and kept walking, his hands trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from anger. A cold, controlled anger he hadn't felt in years. The kind of anger that moved mountains and destroyed enemies. His uncle, his own uncle, betraying the family, betraying John's memory, betraying a sick woman who couldn't defend herself. If it were true, Christopher would make Richard pay. He would recover every stolen cent. He would expose every lie, and he would ensure he could never hurt his family again. But first, he needed proof, solid proof that left no doubt. And for that, he needed Mrs. Teresa's help. Christopher arrived at his apartment in the city centre an hour later. It was a modern, minimalist place with a view of the urban skyline, completely different from the simple neighbourhood where the Dawn Cafe was located. 2 lives, 2 worlds, and he was caught between them. He took a long, hot shower, trying to wash away the tension of the day. Then he put on comfortable clothes and sat down in the living room with his laptop, opening all the files he had about the Dawn Cafe. They were years of reports, sales, expenses, profits. He reviewed them one by one, looking for patterns, for discrepancies, and he found them. In the last 4 months, the sales reported by Natalie were much lower than in previous years, even taking seasonal variations into account. But the most interesting thing were the transfers. Once a month, a significant amount was transferred from the cafe's account to a personal account, an account in the name of Eleanor Harrison. But Christopher knew his mother's habits. She never withdrew large sums. She always kept the money in the business, reinvesting in equipment, employees, quality. These transfers were suspicious, very suspicious. Christopher picked up his phone and took pictures of each document. He created an organized folder with all the evidence he had. It would be a start to build the case against Natalie and whoever was working with her. He worked late into the night, his back aching from poor posture, his eyes burning from the screen light. But he couldn't stop. Each document he reviewed was another piece of the puzzle, more proof that something was deeply wrong. At 2 in the morning, Christopher finally closed his laptop. He had everything he needed to start. Tomorrow, he would talk to Mrs. Teresa, find out what she knew, and then he would begin to put together his plan of attack. But first he needed to sleep. He needed to be rested and alert. Because starting tomorrow the war would truly begin, and he couldn't afford to make mistakes. Christopher lay down in bed, but sleep didn't come easily. His mind kept going back to that conversation with Mei Lin, to her words about his father, to the revelation that his mother was sick and alone. 15 years of silence, 15 years of stupid pride and unresolved hurt. And now maybe it was too late to fix everything. But he was going to try. He was going to try until his last breath, because it was the right thing to do, because his mother deserved it, because he owed it to her, to his father, to himself. The alarm went off at 5 in the morning. Christopher got up, took another quick shower, and dressed in simple clothes. Worn-out jeans, a plain t-shirt, the same cap as yesterday. He needed to look like an ordinary employee. He couldn't raise any suspicion. He arrived at the Dawn Cafe at 5:50. The street was empty, just a few vendors setting up their stalls for the day. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, and there was an almost magical quality to the soft morning light. Mrs. Teresa was already there, waiting at the back door. She saw him and waved slightly, unlocking the door to let him in. "I thought you weren't coming," she said as they entered the silent space of the cafe. "I always keep my promises," Christopher replied. Mrs. Teresa turned on the lights and started making coffee. Her movements were automatic, practiced from years of routine. Christopher watched, seeing the familiarity with which she handled the equipment, the love she put into every action. "You loved my father, didn't you?" he said suddenly. Mrs. Teresa stopped, the coffee spoon suspended in the air. She looked at Christopher with teary eyes. "Your father was the best man I ever knew. He gave me a job when my husband left me, and I had nowhere to go. He gave me dignity when the world only offered me contempt. Yes, I loved him, like you love a saint, like you love someone who saves your life." The words were simple, but filled with emotion. Christopher felt his throat tighten. "And my mother? Mrs. Eleanor is a strong woman, a warrior. She kept the business going after her husband left, even with a broken heart. She worked day and night to keep this place alive. And I swore to myself that I would protect her, that I would protect what your father built." "So you know," Christopher said, "about Natalie, about everything." Mrs. Teresa slowly nodded. "I know, and I have the proof." She went to a cabinet at the back of the office and took out an old shoebox. She placed it on the table and opened it, revealing stacks of carefully organized papers. Original receipts, invoices, transfer records, everything that Natalie tried to hide or destroy, I saved. Because I knew that one day someone would come. I hoped it would be you. Christopher picked up the documents with trembling hands. It was everything he needed, more than he expected. Clear and undeniable evidence of fraud, embezzlement, falsification of records. "Why didn't you do anything with this?" he asked. "Why did you wait?" "Because I'm just a cleaning lady," Mrs. Teresa said sadly. "No one would listen to me. No one would believe me. I needed someone with power, someone from the family. And you were far away. Very far away." The guilt hit Christopher like a punch to the stomach. She was right. He had been far away. He had ignored his responsibilities. He had left his mother and loyal employees like Mrs. Teresa at the mercy of unscrupulous people. "I'm so sorry," he said, and he meant it. "I'm sorry I wasn't here, that it took me so long to come back." "You're here now," Mrs. Teresa said softly. "And that's what matters. Now tell me, what are you going to do with all this?" Christopher looked at the documents, looked around the cafe, and made a decision. "I'm going to destroy Natalie. I'm going to expose every lie, every fraud, and I'm going to recover everything she stole from my mother." "And your uncle?" Mrs. Teresa asked, surprising Christopher. "Have you found out about him yet?" "You know about Richard?" "I know he's been visiting Mrs. Eleanor at the clinic. I know he made her sign papers she didn't understand because her mind was confused. I tried to intervene once, but he threatened me. He said he'd get me fired if I told anyone." Christopher clenched his fists, anger growing inside him like a flame. "He won't threaten anyone anymore, I'll make sure of that." "Be careful," Mrs. Teresa warned. "Your uncle has always been dangerous. Not physically, but he's manipulative. He knows how to use words to get what he wants. He made your father suffer a lot before he died." "What do you mean?" Mrs. Teresa hesitated, as if unsure whether to share what she knew. "Your father and your uncle fought often. Richard always wanted a piece of the business, but John knew he'd ruin everything, so he left everything to your mother, and Richard never forgave him. He swore revenge, swore he'd take everything from Eleanor, and now with her sick he finally has his chance." Christopher felt sick, his family, his own blood, doing this to a sick woman who couldn't defend herself. "I'll stop him," Christopher promised, "even if it's the last thing I do." The front door opened and they both turned quickly, but it was only May walking in with a tired smile on her face. "I thought I'd find you here," she said. "I couldn't sleep all night." "Mrs. Teresa has the evidence," Christopher said, showing the box of documents. "Everything we need to expose Natalie." May came closer and started reviewing the papers, her eyes scanning the pages. "This is excellent. With this and the recordings I have, we can build a solid case. But we still need to find out exactly what your uncle did, what papers your mother signed, whether he has any legal power of attorney." "My lawyer is investigating," Christopher said. "I should have results by the end of the day." "In the meantime," May continued, "you need to keep up your disguise. You need to watch Natalie, see if she makes any mistakes. And you need to earn her trust. Make her think you're just a regular employee." Christopher nodded. It made sense. The more Natalie trusted him, the more she'd let her guard down. And when she let her guard down, she'd make mistakes. mistakes he could use against her. "There's something else," May said, pulling an envelope from her pocket. "This is the address of the clinic where your mother is. Visiting hours start at 9. I think you should go see her. Before we make any move, you need to see with your own eyes what they've done to her." Christopher took the envelope with trembling hands. It was the moment of truth, the time to confront 15 years of absence and regret. "Will you come with me?" he asked, his voice more vulnerable than he intended. "Of course," May answered gently. "I'm not going to let you face this alone. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. The hours until 9 in the morning passed in a fog. Christopher worked mechanically, making coffee, wiping tables, serving the few customers who came in. Natalie arrived at 7:30, surprised to see him already there. "You're dedicated," she commented, but there was suspicion in her eyes. Most new employees show up late on their second day. "I need this job," Christopher said, keeping his voice humble. "I can't afford to lose it." Natalie studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Good. Keep it up, and you'll last here." If only she knew the truth, Christopher thought bitterly. If she knew who he really was, she'd be running out the door. At 8:45, Christopher took off his apron and told Natalie he needed to leave to take care of a personal matter. She grumbled but allowed it, and he left quickly before she could change her mind. May was waiting for him outside in a small old car. Christopher got in, and they drove in silence for 20 minutes until they reached a clean white building in the suburbs. The sign at the entrance read, "Hope Medical Center." "She's on the 3rd floor," May said as they walked in, "room 312. But Christopher, I need to warn you. She's not the same person you remember. The disease has changed her. Changed her a lot." Christopher nodded, but no amount of warning could have prepared him for what he saw when they entered the room. Eleanor Harrison was sitting in an armchair by the window, looking out at the garden. She had always been a strong, robust woman, with black hair and piercing eyes. But the person Christopher saw was an empty shell. Her body was thin, almost frail. Her hair was white and sparse, and her eyes, when she turned to look at them, were vacant. "Mrs. Eleanor," May said softly, approaching, "I brought someone to visit you." Eleanor looked at Christopher without recognition. She tilted her head to the side like a curious bird. "You're new here," she said. Her voice was weak, not the strong voice Christopher remembered. "Are you going to work at the cafe?" The words hit Christopher like a train. She didn't recognize him. His own mother didn't know who he was. "Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking. "It's me, Christopher, your son." Eleanor studied him for a long moment. Her eyes scanned his face as if searching for something familiar, and then, for a brief instant, something lit up in those empty eyes. "Christopher," she said uncertainly. "My boy." "Yes, Mom, it's me. I came back." Tears began to stream down Eleanor's face. She reached out a trembling hand, and Christopher took it, feeling how fragile she had become. "You've grown," she whispered. "You're so big, so handsome. John would be proud." "I'm so sorry," Christopher said, the words coming out in a desperate rush. "I'm sorry I left, for staying away, for not being here when you needed me, for everything." "It's okay," Eleanor said, her voice distant. "You're here now, that's what matters." But then her eyes became confused again. She looked at Christopher as if seeing him for the first time. "Sorry, but who are you?" she asked. "Do you work here?" And just as quickly as it had come, the moment of lucidity was gone. Eleanor had forgotten him again. Christopher felt his heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. May placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "That's how it is," she said softly. "She comes and goes. Sometimes she remembers. Sometimes she doesn't. But the moments of clarity are precious, and you had one of them. Hold on to that." Christopher nodded, unable to speak. He stayed there for another hour, sitting beside his mother, holding her fragile hand as she stared out the window and talked about things that made no sense. Memories mixed with dreams, past with present, reality with fantasy. And somewhere in that confusion, Christopher saw the woman she used to be, the strong mother who raised him alone, the devoted wife who kept her husband's business going, the brave woman who never gave up, even when things got tough. And he promised himself that he would bring that woman back. He would do everything in his power to heal her, protect her, make up for the lost years, even if it meant destroying everyone who had tried to hurt her, even if it meant sacrificing everything he had built, because she deserved it, and because it was the right thing to do. When they left the clinic, Christopher was changed. The anger he had felt before had turned into something colder, more determined. It wasn't just about getting the cafe back or exposing the fraud anymore. It was about justice. It was about protecting someone who couldn't protect herself. "What do we do now?" May asked as they walked back to the car. "Now," Christopher said, his voice hard as steel, "we attack. No mercy, no hesitation. We're going to destroy everyone who tried to destroy my mother." Mei Lin nodded, seeing the change in him, and she knew that Natalie, Marcus, and Richard had no idea what was about to come down on them, because they had messed with the wrong family, and now they were going to pay. Christopher's phone rang as they walked back to the cafe. It was Michael, his lawyer. "Christopher, you won't believe what I found out about your uncle. Tell me everything. Richard Harrison has gambling debts totaling $200,000. He's been pressured by creditors for months, and 3 weeks ago, he opened a bank account in your mother's name. A power of attorney was registered with a notary, giving him full control over her assets." Christopher felt the blood boil in his veins. "But my mother wasn't in any condition to sign anything. She barely knows where she is." "Exactly," Michael confirmed. "Which means that power of attorney can be invalidated, but we're going to need witnesses to confirm her mental state at the time of signing, and we need to act fast because he's already started moving funds." "How much?" $60,000 have been transferred from the cafe's account to his personal account over the last 10 days. If he keeps up this pace, there won't be anything left in a month." Christopher closed his eyes, trying to control the rage threatening to explode. "Prepare the documents to contest the power of attorney. I'll get the witnesses. And Michael, I want everything done today, this very day. It's going to cost a lot to do everything with this urgency." "I don't care, do whatever it takes." When Christopher returned to the cafe, it was noon. The place was busier than in the morning, but still far from what it should be. He put his apron back on and started working, but his eyes never stopped watching Natalie. She was nervous. She checked her phone every 5 minutes. She kept looking at the door as if expecting someone. And when Marcus Sterling walked in at 2 in the afternoon, Christopher saw the relief on her face. They went into the office and closed the door. Christopher found an excuse to clean near the door, and through the crack he managed to hear parts of the conversation. "Her uncle is doing his part," Marcus was saying. 2 more weeks and we'll have full control of the property. Then it's just a matter of forcing the sale." "And what if the son shows up?" Natalie asked, her voice tense. "I heard he's rich now. If he finds out—" "He abandoned his mother 15 years ago," Marcus interrupted. "Why would he come back now? Relax, everything is under control." Christopher had to step away before his anger gave him away. He went back to the counter, his hands trembling as he made coffee. They had no idea. They had absolutely no idea that he was right there, listening to every word, planning their destruction. Mrs. Teresa walked past him and whispered without looking, "There's a meeting set for tomorrow. Marcus, Natalie, and your uncle. They're going to sign the final sale papers. I heard her on the phone a while ago." Christopher nodded slightly, thanking her silently. Tomorrow. They were going to meet tomorrow, and Christopher would be there to end it all. The rest of the day passed in silent preparation. Christopher called Michael 3 times, making sure all the documents were ready. He called Mei Lin and asked her to bring all the recordings, and mentally he began to put together his confrontation plan. He couldn't just show up and accuse them. He needed irrefutable proof. He needed to catch them in the act, admitting everything they had done. He needed to destroy any chance of them getting away with it. At 6 in the evening, when the cafe closed, Christopher took off his apron and got ready to leave. But Natalie stopped him. "Christopher, can you stay a little longer? I need help organizing the inventory." It was odd. The inventory was never organized on Fridays. But Christopher agreed, curious to see where this would lead. They went to the small storage room in the back. Natalie started counting boxes, but Christopher could tell she was just stalling, waiting for something. "Can I ask you something?" she said suddenly. "Sure." "Why did you really ask for this job? You don't seem like the type who needs to work in a coffee shop." Christopher felt his heart race. She was suspicious, but how much did she know? "I need money," he said, keeping his voice casual. "There's no shame in working honestly." Natalie turned to face him, her eyes studying every detail of his face. "You remind me of someone. I can't put my finger on who, but there's something familiar about you." "Must be my common Brazilian face," Christopher tried to joke, but Natalie didn't smile. "Maybe," she said, but she didn't sound convinced. "Anyway, thanks for the help. You can go." Christopher left quickly, feeling her gaze burning into his back. She was starting to suspect. He needed to act soon before she discovered his true identity. That night, Christopher didn't sleep. He lay awake in his apartment, reviewing every detail of the plan. Michael had sent all the documents by email. The challenge to the power of attorney was ready to be filed. The evidence of fraud was organized. All that was left was the final confrontation. At 5 in the morning, his phone rang. It was Mei Lin. "Christopher, your uncle is at the clinic, right now. I heard he's trying to get your mother to sign more papers." Christopher jumped up. "I'm on my way." He dressed in record time and drove to the clinic faster than he should have. When he arrived, he found Richard in the waiting room. It was the first time Christopher had seen him in 15 years, and the man had aged badly. Grey, thinning hair, a face marked by drink and hard years, expensive but ill-fitting clothes. Richard was on the phone, speaking low but urgently. "Yes, I'll get the signature today. After that, she won't be able to contest anything. We'll have total control." Christopher approached silently. When Richard hung up, he said, "Hello, Uncle Richard." Richard turned so fast he almost dropped his phone. His eyes widened as he recognized Christopher. "Christopher, what? How?" "I came to visit my mother," Christopher said, his voice icy. "Something I should have done a long time ago. And you? What are you doing here so early?" Richard quickly composed himself, but Christopher could see the panic in his eyes. "I also came to visit Eleanor. She's my sister-in-law. I have the right." "Of course you do," Christopher agreed. "But you don't have the right to make her sign documents she doesn't understand. You don't have the right to steal from her. And you definitely don't have the right to sell the legacy of your own brother." Richard's face turned red. "I don't know what you're talking about." "No?" Christopher pulled out his phone and started playing a recording. It was Richard's voice on the phone moments ago, talking about getting the signature. "Did you think I came here unprepared? Did you think I don't know everything you've been doing?" Richard took a step back, his eyes searching for an exit. "You don't understand. I have debts, dangerous people. They'll hurt me if I don't pay. And that gives you the right to rob a sick woman." Christopher took a step forward, his voice low but threatening. "Does it give you the right to destroy everything my father built?" "Your father?" Richard spat the words with bitterness. "Your perfect father who never made mistakes, who everyone loved. But he left me with nothing. Nothing. While he left everything to Eleanor. I was his brother. I deserved half." "You deserved nothing," Christopher said coldly, "because my father knew exactly who you were. A parasite, a coward. Someone who only knows how to destroy, never build." Richard lunged forward, but Christopher was ready. He grabbed his uncle's wrist and twisted it, not hard enough to hurt, but enough to immobilize him. "Listen to me carefully," Christopher hissed. "You're going to cancel that power of attorney. You're going to give back every cent you stole, and you're going to get out of my mother's life for good, or I'll sue you for fraud, forgery, and elder abuse, and I'll make sure you spend the next few years paying for it. You can't prove anything." "Yes, I can." Christopher released his wrist. "I have recordings, documents, witnesses. I have everything I need to destroy you. The only question is whether you'll make this easy or if I'll have to drag you through the courts." Richard looked at Christopher for a long moment, and then something broke in him. His shoulders slumped, his face twisted, and he started crying. "I didn't want to," he sobbed. "I didn't want to do it. But they were going to hurt me. They were going to kill my family. I had no choice. Christopher felt a flash of pity, but pushed it away. The excuses didn't matter. What mattered were the actions. And Richard had chosen to steal and lie. You always have a choice, Christopher said. And you chose wrong. Now you're going to pay for it. He picked up his phone and called Michael. I'm with my uncle. File the response to the power of attorney, now. Then he called May. I found Richard. He won't be a problem anymore. Now let's go after Natalie and Marcus. Christopher left Richard crying in the waiting room and went to visit his mother. She was asleep, looking fragile and small in the hospital bed. He sat beside her and held her hand. I promise, Mom, he whispered. I'll fix everything. I'll bring you home. And I'll make that coffee shop shine again, the way Dad always wanted. Eleanor stirred in her sleep, a small smile touching her lips, and Christopher wanted to believe that somewhere deep down she could hear him, that she knew he was there, fighting for her. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Christopher left the clinic determined. It was Saturday, and according to Mrs. Teresa, the meeting between Natalie, Marcus and Richard was scheduled for 10 in the morning at the coffee shop. But Richard wouldn't show. He was broken, shattered. That left only Natalie and Marcus to deal with. Christopher called May, and they arranged to meet at the square near the coffee shop at 9:30. When he arrived, she was already there with Mrs. Teresa. The two women had become unlikely allies, united by love for the same family and the same legacy. So today's the day, Mrs. Teresa said, her hands trembling slightly. We're finally going to end this. Yes, Christopher confirmed, but I need you two to stay outside. This could get ugly, and I don't want you to get hurt. No way, May protested. We started this together. We'll finish it together. Christopher wanted to argue, but he saw the determination in their eyes and knew it would be pointless. Those two women had risked everything to protect his family. They deserved to be there when it all ended. At 9:50, they walked into the coffee shop. Natalie was there, arranging papers on a table. She looked up when they entered, and her face went pale. What are you doing here? She asked, her voice sharp. Today's Saturday, we're closed. I know, Christopher said, slowly taking off his cap. But I thought you might want to have a talk before your partner arrives. Natalie looked from Christopher to May and Mrs. Teresa, confusion and fear warring on her face. Partner, I don't know what you're talking about. No? Christopher smiled, but it was a cold smile. Then let me refresh your memory. Marcus Sterling, international franchise, plan to sabotage the Dawn Cafe and force a sale. Want me to continue? Natalie's face turned white as paper. Who are you? Christopher stepped forward, and it was as if a mask fell. His posture changed, his voice grew firmer. He was no longer the humble employee. He was the businessman, the owner, the son who had returned to protect what was his. My name is Christopher Harrison, son of John Harrison and Eleanor Harrison, and you, Natalie Foster, are fired. Natalie stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. That's not possible. You were dead, I mean missing. No one knew where you were. Surprise, Christopher said dryly. I was building an empire while you were destroying my family's legacy, but that ends today. The door opened and Marcus entered, a confident smile on his face. But the smile died when he saw the scene before him. What's going on here? He asked. A meeting, Christopher replied, but not the kind you expected. Sit down. Marcus glanced at the door, calculating if he could get out. But Christopher blocked the path. I said, sit down. Slowly, Marcus sat down. Natalie followed him, both looking at Christopher with obvious fear. You two think you're clever, Christopher began, pacing around them. You thought you could steal from a sick woman and nobody would notice. But you made a mistake. A big mistake. You underestimated the love people had for my father and the commitment they have to protecting his legacy. He nodded to May, who placed a recorder on the table. With a click, voices filled the space. Natalie's voice talking about embezzling money. Marcus's voice planning the fraudulent purchase. Their own voices, incriminating them without a shadow of a doubt. "That's illegal," Marcus protested weakly. "You can't record people without consent." "Maybe," Christopher agreed, "but I don't need to use this in court. I just need to hand it over to the press. Imagine the headlines. Corrupt businessman and traitorous manager steal from elderly woman with dementia. You'll be destroyed." "What do you want?" Natalie asked, her voice breaking. "Money. We can pay you." "I don't want money," Christopher said, his voice cold. "I want justice. I want you to return every cent you stole. I want you to sign a full confession of everything you did. And I want you to stay out of my mother's life and never come back." Marcus and Natalie looked at each other. They were cornered and they knew it. "And if we refuse?" Marcus tried, but there was no strength in his words. "Then I'll sue you," Christopher said simply. "And I have very good lawyers. You'll spend years in court, waste all your money on defense, and in the end you'll lose anyway. Because I have the evidence, I have the witnesses, and I have the truth on my side." There was a long silence, and then Natalie began to cry. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I needed the money. My sister is sick and the treatments are expensive. When Marcus offered me this opportunity, I thought no one would get hurt. I thought the coffee shop was going to be sold anyway. But people did get hurt, Mrs. Teresa said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was heavy with emotion. "Mrs. Eleanor got hurt. The employees who were fired got hurt. The customers who lost their favorite place got hurt. You hurt a lot of people, Natalie, and there's no excuse that justifies it." Natalie lowered her head, ashamed. Marcus, on the other hand, was still trying to find a way out. "You don't understand how business works," he said to Christopher. "Small coffee shops like this are doomed to fail. We were doing a favor by—" "Shut up," Christopher interrupted him. "Don't try to justify what you did. You're a thief. Simple as that. And now you're going to pay for it." He placed papers on the table. They were written confessions prepared by Michael. They outlined exactly what Natalie and Marcus had done, in precise legal detail. "Sign them," Christopher ordered. "And if we sign, will you let this go?" Marcus Sterling asked, still trying to negotiate. "If you sign and return all the money, I won't take you to court," Christopher Harrison said. "But I will make sure everyone in this neighborhood knows what you did. I will make sure you never work in this city again, and I will make sure that every time someone searches your names online, this story comes up." It was a harsh sentence, but fair. Marcus Sterling and Natalie Foster knew that. Slowly, with trembling hands, they signed the papers. "The money," Christopher continued. "How much did you embezzle?" Natalie looked down. $120,000. Over 4 months. Christopher felt anger burn in his chest, but kept his voice calm. "You have 1 week to return everything, every cent. Or the deal is off and I'll go after you with everything I've got." "I don't have that much money," Natalie admitted. "I spent most of it on my sister's treatments." "Then sell whatever you have to sell," Christopher said without pity. "Your house, your car, your jewelry, I don't care. But you will return what you stole." Marcus Sterling was quiet now, realizing he had lost. He had the money. He had just hoped to get much more. Now he would have to return everything and leave with nothing. "1 week," he said finally. "In 1 week, you'll have your money." Christopher nodded. That was all he could do for now. Force them to return the money, expose their actions, and ensure they could never do it again. When Natalie Foster and Marcus Sterling left, heads down and defeated, the silence in the cafe was heavy. Mrs. Teresa was the first to break it. "You did the right thing," she said to Christopher. "Your father would be proud." Tears stung Christopher's eyes, but he held them back. "I didn't do half of what he would have done. He would have forgiven them. He would have found a way to help even while holding them accountable. I only wanted revenge." "No," Maylene said softly. "You wanted justice. And there's a difference. You could have destroyed them completely. But you gave them a chance to make it right. That's more than most would do." Christopher looked around the cafe. The place his father had loved so much. The place his mother had fought to keep alive. And now, finally, it was back in the right hands, back in the family. "We have a lot of work ahead," he said. "We need to rehire staff, improve the coffee quality, bring the customers back, make this place shine again." "And your mother?" Mrs. Teresa asked gently. Christopher took a deep breath. "I'll bring her home as soon as the doctors allow it. I'll hire the best caregivers, give her all the treatment she needs, and I'll be here every day so that when she has her moments of clarity, I'm there." "You're going to manage the cafe personally?" Mei-Lin asked in surprise. "And your empire?" "I have competent managers taking care of the other places," Christopher said. "But this one needs me, and I need it. I need to reconnect with who I was before I got lost in ambition and success." The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Michael processed the cancellation of Richard Harrison's power of attorney, who offered no resistance. Christopher's uncle disappeared from town. Rumors said he had gone to the countryside to live with distant cousins. Christopher didn't care, as long as he stayed away from his mother. Natalie Foster and Marcus Sterling kept their promise. 1 week later, $120,000 were deposited into the cafe's account. Natalie had to sell her apartment. Marcus Sterling had to liquidate investments, but the money came back, every cent. Christopher used the money to renovate the cafe. New equipment, new furniture, but keeping the vintage charm his father had always loved. He recontacted former employees that Natalie had fired, and he brought Mrs. Teresa from cleaning staff to assistant manager, recognizing her loyalty and dedication. The reopening happened a month later. Christopher made sure it was a community event. Free coffee for everyone on the first day, live music, children playing on the sidewalk. It was like the old days, when his father was still alive and the cafe was the heart of the neighborhood. And his mother, in a wheelchair with a blanket over her legs, was there. Mei-Lin had brought her from the clinic for a special visit. Eleanor looked around with confused eyes, but there were moments where something familiar shone in her gaze. "This place," she murmured. "I know this place." "Yes, Mother," Christopher said, kneeling beside her. "This is your place, yours and Dad's, and now it's back for you." "John," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "John would be happy." "He would," Christopher agreed, his own voice breaking. "He would be very happy." At that moment, surrounded by people who loved his family, in that place that meant so much to so many, Christopher felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace, belonging, purpose. He had spent 15 years building an empire, proving his worth, trying to be bigger and better than his father. But in the end, he discovered that true success wasn't about how many coffee shops you owned or how much money you had in the bank. It was about the connections you made, the lives you touched, the legacy you left behind. The following months weren't easy. Eleanor's health had its ups and downs. There were days when she recognized Christopher, when they talked about the past and she shared memories of his father. And there were days when she didn't know who he was, when she called for John and asked where he was. But Christopher was there for all those days, good or bad, because that was what family did. It didn't give up. It didn't run away. It stayed and fought even when it was hard. Mei-Lin continued to be part of their lives, visiting Eleanor regularly, helping at the cafe when needed. She and Christopher developed a deep friendship built on mutual respect and a shared love for John Harrison and everything he stood for. Mrs. Teresa flourished in her new position. She trained new employees, managed inventory, and made sure every cup of coffee served lived up to John's standards. And she did it all with a smile, happy to finally be recognized for the work she had always done. The Dawn Cafe thrived again. Old customers came back, bringing new customers with them. The neighborhood rediscovered its favorite place, and the cafe once again became the heart of the community, as it always should have been. On a Sunday morning, 6 months after the reopening, Christopher was preparing coffee when Eleanor came in, leaning on Mei-Lin. She had had a particularly good period, staying lucid for days in a row. The doctors said it was a miracle, but Christopher believed it was love. Love, care, and being surrounded by happy memories. "Good morning, Mother," Christopher said, coming from behind the counter to help her sit down. "Good morning, my son," she replied, her eyes clear and focused. You've done a wonderful job with this place. Your father would be so proud." Christopher felt his throat tighten. These were words he had waited his whole life to hear. "I'm just trying to honor his legacy. And yours." Eleanor took his hand with surprising strength. "You already have. Coming back, fighting for us, staying when you could have left. That's all I ever wanted. To have my son back." "I never should have left," Christopher said, the words he had held in for so long finally coming out. "I'm sorry for the things I said, for the fight, for all the lost years." "Shh." Eleanor placed a finger on his lips. "There's nothing to forgive. You were hurt, lost. But you found your way back, and that's all that matters." Christopher hugged his mother, feeling how small and fragile she was, but also feeling the strength that still existed within her. Strength that had allowed her to survive loss, illness, betrayal. Strength that had been passed from father to son through generations. At that moment, surrounded by the aroma of fresh coffee, the buzz of happy customers, the presence of his mother, and the people who had fought by his side, Christopher finally understood what his father had always known. That success was not measured in money or power. It was measured in moments, in connections, in making a difference in the lives of the people you love. And he had all of that now. He had regained his family. He had saved his father's legacy. He had made peace with his past. And he had a future ahead, full of possibilities. The Dawn Cafe was not just a coffee shop. It was a symbol that it's never too late to come home. It's never too late to fix your mistakes. It's never too late to fight for what's right. And as Christopher served coffee to his mother, seeing the smile on her face, hearing her laugh as Maylene told stories, he knew he had made the right choice. He had finally found his place in the world, and it was exactly where he should have always been. At home. The end. Now tell us what you thought of this story and where you are watching us from. If this story touched your heart, share your heartfelt words with us in the comments. Do you think Christopher did the right thing by forgiving his family and fighting for his father's legacy? We would love to read your opinion and your experiences. Thank you very much for your company, and don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other emotional stories we have prepared for you.